All right, guys, we're back. Church debater and preacher Mike. My name's Greg. How you doing, Mike?
Doing well, man. Doing well.
Good, good. I want to remind everybody that our email address is churchdebater@gmail.com. We have a Facebook page called Church Debater and Preacher Mike, and we've enjoyed the questions we've received from you guys. We're just not receiving enough of them. So we want this show to be yours. So make sure you send in your questions. I will remind you. I sound like I'm hurrying. I think I've got several things to mention today. I hope I'm not talking too fast.
Nah.
So I wanted to say that send us in the questions. I wanted to remind you that Mike and I are both members of the New Testament Church. Today, we are going to talk about a book. It's a book that I know both Mike and I have read. I actually enjoyed it when I read it, and I've actually used it to teach a class. And it is a book that has been #1 on the nationwide bestsellers list. Now, our #1 book is the Bible.
There you go.
But we both have read this, and it's the book that came from Bill O'Reilly and his co-writer. I should have written down his co-writer's name before I came on here, but it's the one about killing Jesus. It's in his whole series of the killing books, and I think I've read most all of them. But what we thought we would do today is I'm going to read excerpts from that book and see how Mike feels about them. Let's go ahead and mention that this book is designed to be factual. They did research and they are presenting facts. The book's not designed really to convert anybody to anything. It's more to spell out. And to be honest, Mike, most of these notes came from the footnotes in the back of the book. I think that's where a lot of interesting passages come from.
Well, I did the audio version, and so I haven't seen the footnotes in the back yet. I need to go back and read it. I did the audio book. And by the way, Martin Dugard is the other author.
That's it. You're right. That's who it is exactly. All right, here's the first thing. I'm going to start out easy on you. According to the book, Jesus appeared 12 times on earth after the resurrection. And according to the book, some of the ones that met him after the resurrection spoke about it vividly for years. You buy off on that?
I would. I'm trying to think why 12. Maybe it was. I can think of the road to Emmaus. I know he spoke to them down at the seashore. He went in a closed room with the apostles, and Thomas wasn't there, so he appeared another time with Thomas. 1 Corinthians 15 is an interesting passage. Have you stirred that into it? 1 Corinthians 15, starting in verse 1.
Go ahead.
He actually mentions, let's see, he says, he rose again the third day, seen by Cephas, then by the 12. 500 brethren at one time saw him. He was seen by James, then by the apostles, and then after all this, by me, Paul, born out of season on the road to Damascus. So there are 6 right there. 12 might be true, but to say they talked about it from then on, that's an absolute fact. There's no doubt about that.
Do you think that Paul was the last appearance?
Well, I would say depends on how you define it, because you got John writing the Revelation. And
that's true. Yeah.
John, I think, saw him.
Okay.
So probably John.
I mentioned the book, by the way. I didn't mention it, but I read in the book that they feel like John was, and we know this for a fact, that he was the last to die, but 100 AD, does that sound about right?
Yes, that is.
Okay, all right. Let me read this next one, and this will get some chatter from you, I think. And everybody knows that back in those days, the cross was an absolutely repulsive way to die.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll start with that thought. The book says, indeed, for centuries, Christians were embarrassed by the cross, for it was considered a punishment best suited for slaves, murderers, and members of the lowest class. Those opposed to the new Christian faith mocked believers for worshiping a criminal and his cross, and parodied Christianity as a form of madness. However, Christians began crossing themselves on the forehead and chest as a way of warding off demons, and by the 4th century, the cross was more commonly viewed by Christians with pride. What do you think of that phrase?
I think that certainly the coming to a pride of it. How many times have you heard armies that march with a cross leading them, especially during the Crusades, or
Right.
crosses that even today mark places where people have died? You've seen them along the highways. They'll put a cross
Right.
up. So it has become a memorial honoring of honor, that's for sure. To say that they were ashamed of it, I don't know about that. Paul even says, I won't glory in anything except the cross of Christ. And that was just 25 years after he was on the cross. The problem with the
True.
cross was it was the Romans thing. It was the
Yeah.
Roman idea, and they didn't like that. Now, it was also true that even in the Old Testament, way back before the Romans, it was a form of punishment, a form of killing that was despised, because it not only was a form of death, it was also a painful, dragged out procedure. They could last for days on the cross, and it was exposing the person to full humiliation, probably nude. So that's why it was despised.
Right.
And in the book that I'm reading right now, it's called The Day That Jesus Died. It's an old book, way back, from the early 1900s or so. But it even describes the fact that in his writing, that the Jewish people who had always been looking for a Messiah knew that he was going to die. But they said that it would be a death worthy of God, that he would be floating off into the clouds in flames of
Right.
fire. And so they just despised the whole idea. Yes, whether they were ashamed of it and tried to minimize the cross after Jesus was resurrected, I don't see that in Scripture, but it could be that was somewhat a part of some people's minds.
Okay. All right, here's another excerpt. The Romans sentenced Peter to death on the cross. When he protested that he was not worthy to die in the same manner of Jesus, the Romans agreed and nailed him to the cross upside down.
That's what I have read too. In fact, one of the statements is that his white beard was so long that it covered his face when he was upside down.
Okay, I hadn't heard that. Mm-hmm. All right. Mary Magdalene, after her appearance at the tomb of Jesus, she disappears from our Bible story for the most part, but the book does imply that even though she wasn't an apostle, she could be seen with that group almost constantly as they moved around. Do you agree with that?
I have no way to agree or disagree. I have not researched any history that would say that. I know there are a lot of fanciful stories that have been devised about Mary Magdalene through the years that have become legendary fable status to exalt her in some ways, but I don't know of anything to say yay or nay. It wouldn't surprise me. I mean, all of those people, in fact, if you look at Acts chapter 1, after Jesus was crucified, 120 disciples didn't know what to do.
Right.
They were in an upper locked room trying to figure out what are we going to do next. And so to say that they stayed together to support each other, certainly. And then after he was resurrected and began the church being planted around, they certainly were together then too. But specifically, right. I don't know.
Good.
It makes sense.
This next one may just be more of a statement. The book mentions that George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Ronald Reagan all referenced Jesus sometimes in their battles, in just the ongoing nature and how they wanted to lead the country. So that's always good to hear.
Yes.
But I wanted to mention one thing that he's got a quote in here that is from Martin Luther King Jr. Here's what he said.
Okay.
Just keep loving them, and by the power of your love, they will break down under the load. That's love, you see. It is redemptive, and this is why Jesus says love. There's something about love that builds up and is creative. There's something about hate that tears down and is destructive. So love your enemies. That was something spoken to us by Martin Luther King Jr. back in his
That's
day,
right.
which I think was a great man. You know, I love that speech. I think even as a substitute teacher, I talk about that speech all the time, where it's the week that we normally talk about it or not. That was just more of a statement. You have any comments?
You know, I think his point about love is extremely good. In fact, I've said that many times. It comes to the question of, it comes up this way: why did God even create in the first place? Wasn't he okay by himself? And I say, love creates.
Good.
Love can't do anything else. It has no ability to do anything else, and it creates. That's why love creates children. That's just how it is. And so I agree with him. I think it's right.
Good. I like this. I'm not sure if this is 100% true, but I wanted to the book actually referenced from 1991, the Quarterly Journal of Royal Astronomical Society noted that Chinese astronomers had observed a long-tailed, slow-moving comet in their skies during the March of 5 BC. This star hung in a Capricorn region for more than 70 days. This same comet would have been visible in the skies over Persia, the home of the three wise men that some people refer to as magi, in the hours just before dawn. Due to the Earth's orbital motion, the comet's light would have been directly in front of the wise men during their journey. Hence, they would have truly followed a star. How you like that one?
If it is an absolute fact, I think it is cool, but it doesn't take away from the story itself, or it doesn't really add to it. These men, by the way, we don't know if there were three. These wise men were from the East. That would make sense. Why did they follow the star? I think it is because they were looking for it. They had read in the scriptures of the Old Testament. They were looking for the star.
Good.
And
totally agree.
And so they did. And did God then provide that method by which, or that medium by which they would go to where they wanted? There's no doubt about it. Does God use actual physical things to accomplish his purpose? Absolutely. Did it have to be a miraculous star that never appeared again? It did not. So I would have no problem with that whatsoever.
Let me turn it a little bit.
Yeah.
I know there's people that think this because I've studied this. Did God put this comet in motion way back when, knowing that it would be in the exact right place when it needed to be for the wise men?
Would make perfect sense to me.
Yes, me too. All right. Let's read this one. The month of March coincides with gospel descriptions of shepherds tending their flocks on the hillside, as this is lambing season. December 25th, which we now celebrate or some people celebrate as the date of Jesus' birth, was chosen and named Christmas. That's the shortening of Christ Mass, or the Mass in honor of Jesus' birth, by the Romans once their empire became Christian in the 4th century. For the Romans, that date was once the conclusion of a pagan holiday known as Saturnalia. Once they set aside their more lascivious ways, it made sense to replace that celebration with a day commemorating the birth of their new Savior. So it kind of makes it sound like making lemonades out of lemons. But
That's
they
what it
took
sounds
a
like.
date that was pagan first, and probably partially for convenience, they chose that date. But the real question is, isn't it true that there's no way Jesus was born on December 25th?
That is true. It's not possible. The lambing season in March to April is exactly the time when Jesus was born. That's fact.
Good, good. All right. So here's one that, and I know we've talked about this in the past, so I'm not sure you're going to go along with this. Women were treated better in the time of Jesus than they are in a great many places in our modern world.
Oh, I do agree with that.
Okay, all right, good, good.
Yeah.
I remember last week's episode, you made a reference to that.
That's exactly right. I said Jesus is the greatest liberator of women ever to exist. I mean, they didn't have any status, any privilege, any place in society. It was under the men all the time. And even after Jesus, they still were that way. But with Jesus, here's one of the interesting things. Did you know that under Jewish law that women could not testify in court? Did you know that?
I think I've heard that. I probably heard you say it
They
sometime.
have, because they were considered to be liars. All women lie. They couldn't testify in court. Isn't it interesting that the first people to witness and to talk about the resurrection of Jesus were women?
Good, good.
Designed for that purpose.
That was the exact word I was going to use if you hadn't, just like it was designed that way.
It was, and that's the point. He is making his point to show that men and women, as it relates to their access to God and their status as people, are totally equal.
Good.
That does not mean that they serve the same function.
Absolutely.
And that's the difference.
Okay, good, good. Let's see if you believe this one.
All right.
Somewhere in the 12th century, these supernatural happenings that Jesus performed were first called miracles. The book makes it sound like the word miracle didn't really come along until the 12th century. And I don't know if the Greek language helps with that at all, but they claim that it was more just called Jesus supernatural events, and that they weren't actually called miracles until the 12th century.
Well, except for the statements in Scripture that use the word miracles. I mean, other than that,
what is the Greek word for miracle?
It is. There are two or three of them. It is. Trying to remember.
Oh no! I haven't stumped you yet. Don't let me stump you on this.
Well, simonion, a sign. That's one of them, and I forgot the others. I can't remember.
Well, if you remember before the show's over.
Yeah, I could absolutely find it, because I keep them handy so I can get to them, stuff like that. But we can go ahead while I look at this. How's that?
Okay. This next one's more of a statement anyway, again. So okay. I remember, you know me, I play fantasy sports quite often. And I had a fantasy football team that at one time I wanted them to sound tough. You go ahead, since you've got your thought.
Yeah. What? It's the other one is dunamis, which is power.
Okay.
So you have power, you have sign, and you have oinimus, which is the one who works a miracle. So
right.
So,
all right. So my fantasy football team, I once chose to name Brood of Vipers, because I wanted them to sound tough. When I read this book and read about vipers, man, there's no way I want to name my football team that. Let me read you what they say about vipers.
Yep.
It was a widespread belief at the time that brood of vipers was Jesus called the Pharisees brood of vipers,
yes,
right?
He did. Matthew 23.
Okay. So belief at the time that vipers were hatched inside the mother, then ate their way through her skin to get out killing her in the process. Calling the Pharisees a brood of vipers was akin to calling them parent murderers, which is a loathsome distinction in any culture, but particularly so in a faith such as Judaism, which reverences family. What do you think of that?
Oh, I absolutely think that. Now, I don't know that I've ever heard that reference to vipers in that way, but I know that one of the things that the Pharisees had a problem with, and Jesus called their attention to it, was they didn't honor and respect their parents. You remember the statement about Corban, and he says,
Yes.
your parents get to an age when they need you to take care of them, and you don't do it because you took the money and you said it's Corban, dedicated to the Lord, and therefore
Right.
I can't help you. Well, to say that they disrespected their parents, absolutely true. So that would make sense to me about the vipers. And it makes
Okay. All right.
not only that, think about this. The mother that the viper eats out of, in the figure, the Jewish system, the Pharisees are on the inside. They're eating their way out, and they are effectively destroying Judaism just from the inside out.
Good, good. That's a good parallel there. I like that. All right. We've got two more here. I think it's going to be about right. According to the book, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke make it clear that Jesus was celebrating the Passover meal a day early. This has prompted some to speculate as to whether Jesus served the traditional Passover menu of roast lamb.
No, he did not observe it a day early.
Okay.
The difference is Jewish time, Roman time. In Jewish time, the day before the Passover, which is when they ate the meal, began at 6 p.m. on our Thursday night. So you would have their night, then their day. So the evening before the Passover happened at 6 p.m. on what would be our Thursday night leading into Friday.
Right.
That's when he observed it. Mark wrote it in Roman time and makes it appear as though he did it on Thursday, when in fact he didn't. He did it after 6 p.m., which they would have called Thursday, but the Jews called Friday.
Good, good. And I knew you were going to say that. I've heard you say that before. And so I was leading you on that one.
There you go.
The last one I have was, they say the only other disciple to get a nickname was Simon, who Jesus referred to as Peter, perhaps as a playful stab at Peter's impulsiveness and less than stable personality, because both in Latin and Greek, the feminine noun Petra was used, which means rock. So they act like it was poking fun at Peter for having a less than stable personality. And of course, he's the one that cut off Malchus' ear.
That's fact.
So what do you think of that?
The first thing I'm trying to remember, is Peter the only one that got a nickname?
I mean, Son of Thunder, right, for John, but I'm not, I don't know. He even mentioned Son of Thunder in here, but he didn't call it a nickname.
No, because it wasn't actually, it was Boanerges is the word.
Yes.
Simon, Peter, he changed. Simon had been known as Simon, but now he's going to be known as Peter. But the real truth of the matter is that the concept of rock or stone embedded there, when the confession that he would make later that he is the Christ became the bedrock on which Jesus established his church, Matthew chapter 16.
Absolutely.
And Peter was the first one to present that message in Acts chapter 2. So there's a connection there between Peter, the little stone, on top of the foundation rock, which is the confession of Jesus. What I'm trying to think was, in my mind, am I remembering improperly, did Jesus rename Nathaniel? And that's the one that's sticking in my head. I've got to research that. I don't know.
All right.
So
I'll close with this comment. This is more of a comment, but then I'll let you talk just a couple of minutes about transliteration, because I've heard you talk about it before.
Sure.
One of the things, I won't mention religious organizations specifically, but one of the things that Bill O'Reilly got some heat over when he first published the book is that he did in fact say that baptism back in those days meant immersion. So let's close with you giving us just a couple minute synopsis of how the word got translated in, or transliterated into baptism.
There are two ways to go from language A to language B. You can translate. You take this word and you give it its meaning in this, take the word in A and give it the meaning in B. Or you can transliterate. You can pronounce the word in language A, pronounce it in language B. In Greek, it is baptizo, I baptize. In English, it is transliterated, baptize. There was a book written many years ago describing the men, called The Men of the King James Version. When King James had the Bible printed, he wanted to sell Bibles. That was his number one thing. Everybody wanted to read it. He wanted to make money. So he's making a Bible for everybody. When it came to the word baptize, there were churches that were sprinkling, pouring, and immersing. If he had said, if he had wanted it to be immerse, 2 out of the 3 strains of religious teaching would not have even wanted to have that Bible. But if you transliterate it as baptize, then you can just in your mind accept what you're doing as being true. The truth of the matter is, the word baptizo means to immerse, dip, or plunge. It does not mean in any form sprinkle or pour. It just doesn't. Now, that's the point. If had every Bible been translated from baptize to immerse, there might be a different landscape in the religious world.
Interesting, interesting. All right, that's the last comment I have, so close us out.
Well, I think that these times together are really good, and I really do hope people will give us some really good and deep things to talk about. And I want you to understand, everything that we're saying here, and even at times if Greg and I disagree, we
never happen. It would never happen.
Oh, it never will? Oh, okay. It never has.
We both just lied, didn't we?
We did, right there. The point is, we want to teach what we understand. This is how I understand it. When you ask me a question, I tell you the way I understand it. If I'm wrong, I don't mind coming back on here and tell you, hey, guess what? I overlooked this and I was wrong. So if you disagree, that's fine. If anybody ever disagrees, that's fine. But don't quit talking. Don't quit discussing, because you might find an answer that you didn't know about.
And I'll even, to strengthen that, I'll mention something that I'm better at now than I used to be. I'll state an opinion, and if it's different than somebody else's, I'll say, all right, I understand why you feel this way. Let's sit down and study together and see what conclusion we can come to.
There you go.
So, but I never want to cut somebody off just because their opinion is different than mine.
Right.
All right, man. So we will talk to you next week. Have a good one.
Thanks, Greg.
All right.
Bye-bye.